All right, I was waiting for the gibbons. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to get us started. Thank you so much for joining us for our second webinar and our Saving the Wild series. I'd like to send a very warm welcome to members of the Legacy Club and other loyal supporters of the Nature Conservancy. Your generosity makes all this possible. My name is Warren Miskell. I'm based in Maine, and one of the best parts about working with the Legacy Club team is that I get to share events like this with all of you. Our speakers are joining us from Jakarta, Indonesia, and Brisbane, Australia, and I know that all of you are joining from far-flung regions, and it feels fitting that we gather from across such a wide range of time zones, since this reflects the broad scope and reach of the Conservancy's work, as well as the international flavor of today's call. And speaking of time zones, our two speakers, it's tomorrow for them already, so they're heading into the weekend. Today, we're here to learn about a part of the world that is critically important for preserving biodiversity and combating climate change. And we're lucky to have two experts with us who are well-versed in these issues. Please notice on your screen two reminders about where to type questions as they arise and how to take advantage of closed captioning. Both of these icons will be located at the bottom of your screen in the menu bar. And my colleagues and I will post links and other information in the chat window during the course of the presentation. And we are excited to answer as many of your questions as possible. So as they start to occur to them, feel free to open the Q&A icon and start typing them in. So I'd like to briefly introduce our two speakers. Herlina Hartanto is the Executive Director of YCAN TNC, and she's based in Jakarta, Indonesia. YCAN is the local organization through which TNC works in Indonesian-Borneo. And Eddie Game is the Conservancy's Senior Lead Scientist in the Asia-Pacific region. And as mentioned, he's joining us from Brisbane, Australia. And before our presenters get started, let's look at a map and talk a little geography. Indonesia is the world's largest island nation with over 17,000 islands. Borneo is the world's third largest island after Greenland and New Guinea, and portions of Borneo are controlled by 3 different countries. So Indonesia controls about 73%, and that's highlighted in green. Malaysia controls about 26%, which is in blue. And finally, the Sultanate of Brunei controls about 1%, and that's there in orange. And TNC works in the Indonesian section of Borneo. And so you'll hear us referring to this as Indonesian-Borneo or Kalimantan, as Kalimantan is the Indonesian word for Borneo. And finally, the work that we're going to be learning more about today takes place in the province of East Kalimantan. So with that, we're going to dive in. I'm going to play a quick video, which will introduce us to the region and some of the species that are found there. And then Herlina will take over. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, warm greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. It's a great honor for me to be here with you all today. The short video we just saw describing the forests of Indonesia and the rich biodiversity they contain, including the orangutans. Today, I will talk about the importance of protecting the habitat of orangutans in Indonesian-Borneo. But first of all, why we talk about orangutans today? Why they are so important? Well, to start with, orangutans are amazingly intelligent. They are semi-solitary and they can live to more than 50 years of age. Birute Galdikas, a well-known primatologist who spent decades studying and rescuing orangutans in Borneo, in her book, Reflections of Eden, call orangutans the master of hide and seek. And this is because they are soundless movement, high in the dark shadows of dense tropical forest canopy, make it extremely difficult for the untrained eyes to catch their presence. Orangutans are also the world's largest seed dispersers. The survival rate of the seeds dispersed by the orangutans is around 97%. So the orangutans provide a very important service in the natural regenerations of forests. Orangutan can only be found in these two islands in the world, Sumatra, of species Pongo abeli, and Borneo, Pongo pygmaeus, where they can found in the Indonesian part of the Borneo and also the state of Sabah, Malaysia. Currently, the total population is orangutan is estimated to be around 6,000 to 7,000 individuals in Sumatra and around 40,000 to 50,000 in Borneo. Now, as their population is declining, IUCN classified both the Sumatran and the Bornean orangutans as critically endangered. Orangutan is also protected by the Indonesian law. Now, in no other places in the world, but these two islands, can we find orangutans in the world? So it's very crucial for us to protect the forest landscape where they live. But tragically, the habitat of orangutans or the forest is lost at a very incredible rate. Industrial timber, mining, and the rapidly growing palm oil industries are destroying the Indonesia forest faster than anywhere else on Earth. In 2012, Indonesia lost almost twice as much forest as Brazil. And today, more than half of the Indonesia's tropical forests are already gone. The trend was also observed in the Indonesian-Borneo or Kalimantan, as large areas of forests were cleared for plantations, for mining operations, and the trees were cut down for timber. Due to forest loss, based on our survey, we learned that the distribution of orangutans has been shifted. Now, around 78% were found outside protected areas, such as in mining areas, in timber and oil palm plantations. And these situations really put orangutan at risk, as they may encounter dogs, harassed, or kill, as they were considered as pests. The orangutan can eat young palms or young shoots, and also the bark of acacia trees. And by doing so, they can kill the plants and may cause significant losses for the plantation owners. So for these reasons, it's very important for us not only to work in protected forests, but also in forests allocated for productions or what we call the working forest. And the need to work with multiple actors, with the government, with companies, with community at different levels, from national to villages. We have been promoting a coalitions for orangutan habitat protection in East Kalimantan for more than 5 years now. And we focus our efforts in Wehea Kelai landscape in East Kalimantan, covering around 500,000 hectares. This landscape consists of a mix of protected forests, oil palm, pulp and paper plantations, and timber concessions, and at the same time, sustain the life of 1,200 individuals, Bornean orangutans, that call the landscape home. The Wehea Kelai landscape is also an important landscape for the indigenous people of Wehea, one of the early settlers in the area, and whose identity ties to the forest. The engagement of the indigenous people is key since they've been protecting around 38,000 of forests for decades using their local rules, and their forest lies at the heart of the landscape. Their engagement in this initiative ensure that their interests are considered and their rights are protected. I will talk more about these indigenous people a bit later on. As of today, the coalitions of orangutan habitat protection has brought together 8 private companies operating in this landscape who work together with government and the indigenous people to protect and sustainably manage the forest with our support. This public-private community partnership has been recognized as a model by the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry. So it is a big win for us to show how to manage orangutan habitat across a large landscape in ways that protect the wildlife, communities, and at the same time support businesses. We are now in the process of replicating these coalitions, this partnership to another landscape, the karst ecosystem of Sangkulirang Mangkalihat. This mountainous karst landscape support a diversity of plants and animals, including around 750 individuals of black orangutans, a subspecies of Bornean orangutans. And although it is called black orangutans, the color of the hair is actually not black, it's just darker. Covering an area of 1.5 million hectares, this is one of the largest karst ecosystem in the Southeast Asia. And this is also a very important landscape for local people. It protects underground freshwater sources and harbor a unique network of caves that shelter the oldest cave paintings in Southeast Asia. The hand paintings shown on this slide are with dots. And according to the French archaeologists who visited the caves, these dotted hand paintings are prehistoric, dated to around 10,000 years old and cannot be found anywhere else on Earth. So this is one of the reasons why we're supporting the East Kalimantan government to obtain the geopark status and the World Heritage status for some part of this landscape. So in the last 7 to 8 minutes, I already talked about orangutans in Indonesia-Borneo, and that to protect orangutans, we have to protect their natural habitats. And this can be done only if governments, companies, and local communities work together. I also talk about 2 key landscapes, Wehekalai and Sangkulirang Mangkalihat. I will now hand it over to Eddie, who has spent some time in both landscape to share his experience and his work. Very exciting study on acoustic with all of you. I hand it over to you, Eddie.
Hey, thanks, Helena, and hi everyone from Brisbane, Australia. And after a couple of years of working from my home in Brisbane, it is lovely to hear those sounds of the Bornean rainforest and see those photos. And I've had the great privilege of spending a lot of time there, and a lot of that time with Helena. And one of my favorite places in the world is right in the middle of that Wehekalai landscape that she mentioned. And we've spent some time there together in this little, it's kind of like a wooden cabin that we help the community build. And we use it as kind of a research base, but it's got this rainforest creek running right along the side of it. And it's almost in a closed canopy. And it's one of those places that if you wake up there and hear the sounds, you will remember that forever. And it's one of the most striking things is when you're in these healthy forests, its sound is overwhelming, especially in that morning period, that kind of dawn chorus when the forest is waking up. And I was speaking to Warren before this, and he mentioned that many people, maybe many of you were lucky enough to experience the cicada emergence recently, have a sense of how noisy forests can be. But for many of us, it's not our experience of nature being really noisy. And part of that's because we often go out in nature during the middle of the day when things are quiet. Part of it's how we hear, which I'll get to later. And part of it's because we are also often in degraded environments and they're quieter. And there's a really long history of conservationists and environmentalists linking that kind of quietness to environmental degradation. And surely none more impactful than this woman, Rachel Carson. And most of you, I'm sure, will know Rachel Carson from this book, Silent Spring. And this book deals with the impact that pesticides have on the reproduction of songbirds. And when this book was published in 1962, the science around that was actually really well established. It had been established for a number of years and known by the government as well. But it was really Rachel Carson's notion that the world would be quieter and that would be a loss, that galvanized the subsequent action and led to, amongst other things, the creation of the US EPA. And, when I started doing this acoustic research, I was really excited. This is probably 3 or 4 years ago when I found this out, and many of you might know this, to find out that Rachel Carson was one of the first trustees of the Nature Conservancy's chapter in Maine. And she actually donated the royalties from this book, Silent Spring, to the Nature Conservancy. And so we know her as this famous author and environmentalist. But before that, some people don't remember that Rachel Carson had a previous life as a marine biologist. And her very first book was this one, The Sea Around Us, published in 1951. And this was a bestseller at its time too. And she got a lot of requests to give talks. But she was a nervous and by all accounts, not particularly great public speaker, to the point that her agent said, please don't accept any invites, just focus on writing and everything will be fine. But for some reason, to her agent's dismay, she agreed to give a talk, a luncheon talk at the Astor Hotel in New York to the Ladies Garden Club of America. And we know from her diary that she was really nervous about how she would communicate to them, and particularly how she would bring the wonder of the sea that she knew to a bunch of people sitting in a hotel in New York. And what she chose to do was play sounds that she'd recorded off the coast of California, of fish feeding and shrimps cracking and dolphins squeaking. And I can only imagine that for the audience there, it must have been like the first time we started seeing those terrific TED Talks, 5 or 6 years ago. And, this would have been almost certainly the first time that most of them had heard those sounds from under the ocean. And that was in 1951. It went 70 years on, and we're really only now just realizing quite how much sound can tell us about the health of environments. So now for a little bit of science, because that's my job. The human ear can hear, we can hear really well and over a wide range from about 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, 20,000 hertz. So you could talk about 20/20 hearing if you like. But for us, our sweet spot is about 1,000 to say 3,000 or 4,000 kilohertz. That's when we hear really well. We can hear really quiet things in that band. When it gets outside that band, noises have to be much louder for us to hear them. And you may have, noticed you had this experience sometimes of being in a restaurant, for instance, when everyone's talking, or being in, being in an event and there's a dinner speaker and everyone's saying you can't hear them very well. And that's because we're mostly speaking at the same frequency. Oh, if you could just go back one. We're mostly at the same frequency. And so our messages are kind of getting distorted. They're getting sort of interrupted by each other. And the same thing happens in a forest. And so you have all of these different animals. What they've done is essentially evolved to communicate at different frequencies so they can communicate clearly with each other over the din of the forest, of everything making noise in the morning. So you can imagine, if you think about this, that all of that collection of sounds, all the animals making noise, the amphibians, the birds, the insects, the mammals in places like Borneo, that includes primates, their sort of total sound is the soundscape, the acoustic equivalent of a landscape. And one of the things we can do is make a recording of that. And it looks a little bit like this next slide. You can imagine you can make a recording at any point, and you can work out how many of those frequency bands are filled up with sound. And in a healthy forest, this is what it kind of should look like, things in everything. And as you use a forest and degrade it, you start to lose some species, and you start to lose the sounds that they make. And you can pick that up in recordings you make of the forest. You start seeing those soundscapes get a little diminished. It's kind of like the great silent dawn, if you like. And that was a stylized version, and this is a real version. So this is, if you take the sound that we record and sort of present it visually, it's called a spectrogram. And this, you can see very quickly, these are 2 recordings made in Borneo for the same time of day, and one's from a nice healthy rainforest at the top. You see how busy with sound that is. And the bottom one is from a forest as well, but it's a plantation, an acacia forest. Like Helena had mentioned, acacia being eaten by orangutans. And you see how kind of dull it is. It's very boring. And yeah, that's the difference between a kind of healthy forest and a dull forest. And we can see that so quickly in sound. But what you see on the screen here is only a couple of seconds of sound. And if we wanted to look at 24 hours in that, that would be a mile long. So what we do is, so we can quickly compare sites, we do a sort of summary like this, where you can see a day in the life of a forest in sound. You can see different groups, and you can begin to compare environments both visually, and we can compare it sort of statistically too. And it begins to tell us how our work is going, whether the environments are getting healthier, how other activities are impacting the environment. And I kind of love to think, if Rachel Carson were alive, how satisfied she would be to see us using sound in this way. And I'm going to pivot slightly now to tell you, oh good, I forgot about this bit. That's great. So this is the actual devices we use to record that sound. It's a box with a microphone on the bottom, and we strap them to trees. And you know, all funny things happen when you do that. One of the beautiful things is that you can strap it to a tree and walk away, and it's collecting data without you. So you don't have your impact on the forest. There's no animals hiding from you. It's collecting sort of a pure signal. But these forests in Borneo grow so quickly that we've had some really funny occurrences. So one time we left it out for a few months, only a few months, and this strap that you see around there was tight. And the tree, the big tree, grew so fast that it bent the entire sort of microphone housing around the growing tree in a space of 3 months. It's a problem you only have in the tropical rainforest of Borneo. And I think now we've got a couple of sounds that actually come from recordings in the Wahea Kalai landscape of a couple of the really iconic things you hear on those recordings. Awesome. You can't really get tired of that. That is sort of predictably is my favorite sound of those forests. I think it's most people's favorite sound, gibbons. And that's one of the things you do wake up to in the forest, is gibbons duetting to each other like that. I could probably give or take the first sound. That's hornbills. They are a spectacular bird, but they have a kind of honking sound. But they're unfortunately a sound that is increasingly rare in these forests, because those hornbills are hunted very heavily for the casque, the big bone on the top of their head. But as Helena mentioned, you know, there are some great national parks in Borneo, but by far the majority of forests, especially the good forests that are left in Borneo, are in logging concessions. So you can imagine, if you look down on the sort of top of the forest in Borneo, like a map of it all, it's all divided into little blocks that are about 100,000 hectares, 100,000 acres, sorry, each, maybe a little bit more on average, and therefore selective logging. So a company has the right to go in and collect trees, and it's not, you know, they don't sort of clear the whole forest. What they do is they go and select individual high value trees, and it can actually be quite sympathetic to the environment. You can certainly retain a lot of biodiversity on a forestry concession. I thought you guys would get a little kick out of this. This is a photo that comes from the official TNC archive, and this is what happens when you turn up onto a forestry concession and you tell them you're coming. This is one I took myself on the same concession when I didn't tell them a TNC photographer was coming. I think Helena, I see her smile. I think she'll know that one on the right is more representative of logging practices in Kalimantan. But I wanted to come back to logging because in the times that we've spent there and traveling around, one of the things we started to notice is that there's a lot of forestry concessions that are not being used actively. People have left, the companies that own them have left them, and they've left them because it's hard to make money. It's actually sort of a marginal business. And one of the consequences of that is that the forest is sort of unmanaged and often gets illegally encroached upon when there's no one there actively managing it. And we ended up doing a study, Helena's team and myself, and together with Princeton University, and we found that forestry concessions that are not being used for forestry, so no one's cutting timber on them, actually lose more forest than those that aren't being actively harvested just because of that illegal encroachment. And so one of the things Helena and I have been working on is seeing whether there's ways that the Nature Conservancy in Yekang can get involved in trying to sort of stem that hemorrhaging of forests out of that forestry concessions and keep that intact forest. And so I'm going to hand back to her now to tell you more about that and about some of the other things we're doing in Borneo. Thanks, Helena.
Thank you so much, Eddie. And it's wonderful to hear the recorded sound of the forest. It actually reminded me of the time that we actually spent together in the forest of Kalimantan. Now, since you already talked about the importance of having the forest actively managed by timber or logging concessions, I think it's a good time for me to talk a bit about villages in Indonesia, because many of those villages are actually located inside the timber concessions. Across Indonesia, there are around 80,000 villages. So it's a lot of villages across Indonesia. And around 1/3 of those villages are located inside or around the forest. The forest supply food and water, medicines, and also livelihood for the local people. The forests are basically their supermarkets. And for the indigenous people, forests also supply rich traditions and culture. Based on our experience and also observations, local and indigenous people can be the best stewards of the forest, including the forest where orangutan live. This local community, however, often face challenges in balancing village development and forest protections. On one hand, they need to plant rice, cacao, coffee, rubber, or other cash crop to generate income, or cash to send their children to school or to get medical services. And to plant the crops, it means that they may need to cut down some of the trees or the forest. And on the other hand, they also need timber for building their houses or boats. They need rattan, bamboo, honey, or herbs from the forest, which means that they really need to keep the forest intact. So this community really need to balance all of those different needs. Now, understanding the challenges that the local community face, we developed an approach called Communities Inspiring Actions for Change, or SIGAP, that puts community in the driver's seats of green development and forest protections. Using this approach, we help communities in undertaking proper land use and village development plans, securing their rights over forests, and also developing forest-compatible livelihood so that they can improve their well-being and contribute to forest protections. We started implementing SIGAP in 2 pilot villages in Brau district, and we then replicated SIGAP to 25 villages with partners. In 2018, 3 years ago, the Brau government was impressed with the progress and the impacts they saw in those SIGAP villages, that they actually adopted SIGAP, and they allocated their own budget to put one facilitator in each village instead of the normal one facilitator in 4 villages. They also leverage funding from a private company and engage us to design and support program implementations in all 99 villages in Brau district. As a part of the SIGAP program, we have trained more than 100 farmers in improving their existing rubber plantation and rubber sap processing, and have connected them with committed buyer company in the nearby city so they can get better price for the product. We have also provided training for more than 150 cacao farmers on how to process cacao beans into added value products such as cacao powder and also chocolate bars. So the better managed rubber plantations and also cacao gardens, the new skills to better process rubber sap and cacao beans will generate better income for farmers. And by continue building their awareness and commitment to protect forests, farmers will not expand their plantations or garden into the forest. SIGAP is also used to support the indigenous people of Wehea that I mentioned earlier. We supported Wehea in setting up community gardens and nursery to produce seedlings that they sell to the surrounding companies who need to replant their degraded forests. And we also supported them in developing cabin or lodges that we saw in the video inside the forest that actually attracted around 300 tourists per year before the pandemic. So the gardens, the nurseries, and also the cabins generated income that enabled them to establish and financially support a team of forest guardians, or in their local terms, Pekuk Mahui, shown on this slide, that regularly patrol the forest. And by doing so, they actually managed to stop illegal hunting and illegal logging in their forests. And this is a big achievement indeed, and the national government awarded them the highest environmental award for their achievement and commitment in protecting the forest. To help ensuring that the Indonesia forests continue to be protected and managed sustainably, we are currently in the process of acquiring a timber concession. As Eddie explained, the timber concession is actually a company that holds a 35 years license to cut trees or to undertake logging operations. The company that we are about to acquire is located in the Wehea Kalai landscape that we mentioned earlier. This is the same landscape where we help establishing coalitions to protect the orangutan habitat. The concession has been inactive for a couple of years, meaning it is understaffed. There is no operations, there's no efforts to protect the forest from encroachment and other illegal activities. And the idea is that once we take over the concessions, we will implement and demonstrate less destructive or more sustainable logging practices and develop other businesses such as ecotourism. And we hope also later on that we can probably generate revenue from carbon offset project. In managing the concessions, for sure, we will work with the nearby villages and work with local and regional governments. And by acquiring these timber concessions, we hope that we can create a multi-business model that we can use to inform and shape the practices of other timber companies in the landscape across Kalimantan and also in other parts of Indonesia. I stop here, and I thank you so much for your kind attentions and for giving me and Eddie the opportunity to talk about our work in Indonesia. We are happy to take questions and also to further discuss our work with you. Thank you.
Yeah, so Eddie and Herlina, thank you so very much. I have to admit, I'm incredibly envious of your time in the Wehea Forest. So if you'll take me into the forest someday when you come visit me in Maine, I'll take you to the Rachel Carson Salt Pond Preserve because it's only about 45 minutes from my house. Well, thank you so much for your time, sharing time with us today. You know, the two of you are amazing, and likewise our Legacy Club members, our other loyal supporters. You're amazing. Your support and generosity, your partnership sort of make a huge difference for the communities, animals, and the environment of Kalimantan. So I'm sorry that we have to close this up. My colleague John is going to add a link to a survey in chat, and we'd love to hear your candid comments if you have a few moments. Likewise, there will be a recording of this webinar available hopefully within a week, but the Thanksgiving week may slow us down a little bit. So within a couple of weeks, and John is posting the site where that can be found. And then if you have any additional questions for us, John's posting an email address at which you can contact us. So with that, I'm going to call it an evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening or the rest of your day, depending upon where you are. And although people are signing off, excuse me, I will leave the webinar running for a little while so that you have time to actually access the links in chat. So again, thank you so very much for being here with us as supporters, and likewise, Eddie and Herlina, thank you so much for your time today. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody, good night. Bye.